Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
Welcome to Plain Talk. And, yesterday in Fargo was a tough news story. And I can't help but think of this as a journalist, because the Attorney General's office and our guest, by the way, is Attorney General Drew Wrigley, my co-host Chad Oban. They released some video of that terrible shooting in Fargo. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking that the release of the video might be controversial. And I was thinking of it about how important it is, because, the video gets released and a lot of people click and a lot of people see it. And I don't know, maybe people could think of it as salacious. I don't view it that way. I have always viewed it from the perspective that it's important for people to see what we're talking about. It's one thing to read a police report. It's one thing to hear the Attorney General stand behind a podium and describe for you what happened, or to hear one of the law enforcement officers describe what happened. It's another thing to see it for themselves. And we've had so many debates about law enforcement and use of force and everything. And again, these videos are horrible. No normal person enjoys watching them, but I think it's important that we see them. I guess having said all that, I'll invite our guest on now, Drew Wrigley. Drew, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to be with you both.
So tell us about the release of that video. I mean, obviously I editorialized there a little bit. I think it's important for the public to see it. It's not a happy thing. It's not a glad thing, but I think it's one of our responsibilities as citizens sometimes to look at this stuff, to look the problem, as it were, right in the face.
Right. Yeah, I think that's critically important. It's a matter of public concern and interest, and it's both of those things, because the public, has a concern. You just articulated very well why. And so we've described what took place in several news conferences as we've come out, both when the initial news conference where I had to reach a determination on the use of deadly force by Officer Robinson. That was a very straightforward determination, but it's an important step in moving toward his return to in the event that it's determined to have been used appropriately, as was the case here, then it's a return to service and also administratively internally. So we moved through that. Our BTI was conducting this investigation, and it continues to now from the immediate minutes and hours following the murder of Officer Willeen and the shooting of the other individuals involved. And so, we've been gathering that information, going through that, and then we announce it publicly and talk about it. But at some point, it's appropriate that the public then get to assess that video in light of what has been spoken of. And they got to do that yesterday. And I'm comfortable as saying, as I said all along, I wasn't trying to make officers sound one way or the other. I was reflecting in a mirror-like image what I knew to have taken place based on what I had observed in all of the video coverage of what took place. And I think the takeaway from all of them when you watch these videos is to see that that the work of the police officers involved was well done police work. It was appropriate use of force, tremendous reserve, even under horrible circumstances, and then the reaction of the other people who responded to the scene afterward, including Fargo Fire, who was on the scene when the shots were fired, saved lives. People conducted themselves well. And in the case of Officer Robinson, who was the last man standing after this armed assailant in a complete ambush attack, which was evident again yesterday from the video, ambush attack, shoots down 3 officers, murdering 1, severely injuring 2, severely injuring a civilian. Officer Robinson is the last man standing. He's the last officer on scene, and no other officers were going to get there in time. to address this situation, and he was completely outgunned. He had his service weapon on him, just his pistol, his semi-automatic Glock, and he faced with the guy with a high-powered 223 round AR type weapon that was outfitted with a specialized trigger that is legal, but which turned it into the functional equivalent of an automatic weapon. And people got to hear that yesterday and realized it wasn't just Drew Wrigley or someone characterizing it that way. And the shots fired were absolutely automatic fire, and that is a part of this equation as well. It doesn't cause it. It doesn't make somebody into a venomous soul who's going to shoot at other human beings and murder human beings and wreak this carnage. It doesn't make them into that, but it absolutely is the reason Officer Dotis was struck before he even knew it was coming by multiple rounds. That Officer Hawes took multiple rounds. That Carly was gunned down by a burst of multiple rounds. And Officer Jake Lean was struck by a single round. But who knows how accurate the guy would have been at that distance? Well, he's sending out a spray of bullets. He didn't need to be as accurate.
Hey, Drew, this is Chad. And in full disclosure, I haven't actually watched the video. I've decided I need to be in the right headspace to watch it, but have heard a lot of commentary from folks talking about the Officer Robinson's heroic work. It's my understanding that it was 21 shots that fired and hit the assailant. And then can you talk a little bit about that, and then also talk about how Officer Robinson is doing? I mean, I can only, and the other officers from a mental health. Right. I mean, we hear a lot about the physical health side of this, but there's got to be some real trauma that comes out of an experience like this.
Oh, for sure. They and their families, right? Their loved ones. These are all, people who have family and loved ones, people who care about them. And the broader law enforcement community is traumatized to a degree. But to your point, yes, Officer Robinson exchanged fire with the Barakat, who was armed with he had heavily armed. He had the 223 AR type rifle that he was shooting. He also had two semi-automatic loaded handguns on his person, one of which he tried to deploy against the officer and perhaps even the civilians who were one car away from him, hiding behind the vehicle as the gunfight broke out. Officer Robinson is at a distance that, I mean, anyone with familiarity knows 70 feet is a long way to be shooting a handgun accurately. And Officer Robinson had the poise of mind to know as these shots first rang out, first thing he did was radio in. Total protocol and training. You've got to radio in. You don't know what the circumstance is going to be or if you're going to be the next person shot. So he radioed in, shots fired, calling in backup, and immediately stood up and engaged Barakat at that about a 70-foot range. And his initial bursts were, I don't know, in the neighborhood of 5, 6, 7 rounds. I have this precise number here someplace on my desk, and he struck him twice. Once struck his gun rather, and somewhat disabled that the clip wasn't going to operate anymore. And it still had 20 rounds left in it. So that was fortunate. And then also struck Barakat, and that put Barakat to the ground, which then stopped the functional equivalent of automatic fire out of that 223. But the defendant is still trying to get he doesn't know that his gun's disabled, and neither does Robinson. So Robinson now walks around the vehicle and is calling. It's only then that he notices he's got 3 officers down. He calls that in, he's got 3 officers down, telling them, I said one of them, there's a lot of heartbreaking moments as you watch it. But for me, watching it's always been one of the most heartbreaking is when he just says, we've got 3 officers down and everybody. And that summed it up. He needs it to everybody. But he kept his eye on what he needed to do. He needed to neutralize that danger. There were still civilians just feet away from this guy. He's now, and he gives him several commands. He's now standing and gives him several commands to put the gun down, show your hands. Barakat is fumbling with the 223, and Robinson um, shoots him several times at that point again, at which point he pauses, and Barakat then now reaches over and pulls out his 9mm handgun, which Robinson then starts ordering him to put down the gun. He does it repeatedly, ordering him to put down the gun. He doesn't put down the gun, and Robinson is left with no choice but to fire on him further. I mean, at this point, I imagine he had to be thinking that the guy's wearing body armor or something, because he's not responding in the normal way. And at this point, I think it's pretty obvious that he's hitting him with rounds. And so
was he wearing body armor?
He was not. No, he was not. He was not wearing anything. And even after that, after he does this 8 more times, he tells him, hands up, drop the gun, complete non-compliance. Robinson shoots him 3 more times. And then he tells twice again, he tells him to drop the gun. Robinson then shot multiple rounds of 5 rounds, and then 3 rounds, and then 6 more commands to drop the gun. Barakat still is not dropping the gun. Robinson went up, goes around the back of the car, and now he knows. He knows when he comes out that other side of that car, this guy's going to be on the ground, either completely, neutralized or not. And he gives one more command. Robinson does, as he comes around, put down the gun, and he comes around, and you see that the Barakat is still waving the gun around. It's kind of back in Robinson's direction, and he neutralizes them with 5 rounds, rapid 5 rounds into Barakat that neutralized the threat completely. Barakat was not dead at that point, but on his way, and they cuffed him as is protocol and as required. They cuffed him, and then Robinson immediately, this isn't on the video yesterday, we didn't include this for what are obvious reasons, he then made his way immediately over to Dotis and Hawes, who were at that point, laying there helpless. I mean, unable to move. Hawes had been shot in the forearm. He had been shot multiple times in the abdomen, the hip. He was unable to stand. Of course, he was about several feet away from where Dotis had gone down, and Dotis was in very severe distress from multiple wounds. And Hawes, even while the gunfight's going on, when you watch some of the other video, Hawes crawls Dotis's side on his elbows, just pulling his body along to get to him, because it was so clear to him what distress Dotis was in, which he was, because his lungs were filling with blood. And all this is happening so rapidly. I noted that Hawes is never looking around for, are there other shooters? Are the shooters is the shooter in my direction? And it's all going on in the background. You can hear Robinson calling out. And again, this is additional video that we didn't play yesterday. But I don't know. I'll leave it there. These are heroic acts. They are not, as you look at them, I've spoken with Officer Robinson, and I tied people up pretty well, I think. I say in all humility, and told him, I'm not trying to big brother you at all, but I read you as somebody who's probably not very comfortable with what you're about to spend the next many weeks hearing. And he kind of nodded, and I said, you have to accept that people are not gratuitously just saying, oh, he's a hero because he's an officer. These acts were heroic. They were life-saving. They were self-sacrificing. He was not. He was doing this in a way that put him in to say harm's way is an understatement. And he really did save, I don't know how we can calculate the number of lives. This defendant, Barakat, was armed with 3 223, well, actually 2 223 round long rifle, AR type rifles. He had an AK type rifle. It's a little bit different caliber. He had multiple handguns. He had 1,800. That's 1,800 rounds of 223 ammunition loaded in clips in his vehicle. He had 2 canisters with an explosive substance that had been detonated they were bombed. I mean, they blow to shrapnel based on the charge that was in them. Cans of gasoline. I mean, he was on his way to committing a multi-casualty atrocity, and we get that in part from his from his preparation, and then also from his computer searches in the days leading up to that. We'll be releasing those at some point. There are multiple that he was very interested in, large crowd events. And the last search on the last night before this was of a news story on thousands flocking to downtown Fargo for the street fair, which was the direction he was headed on 25th Street in Fargo. He was about, I don't know, maybe a mile from there. He would have been there in 5 minutes.
Drew, let's talk one thing about the arsenal, and you're right. I mean, that puts into context how important what Officer Robinson did what was. I mean, at that point, he was kind of the last line.
Mm-hmm.
If the shooter's able to get beyond this incident, where else does he go, and how many more people does he kill? Thankfully, we don't have to know the answers to those questions.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the binary trigger. State legislature took a specific action to protect binary triggers.
Yeah.
To me, this is not, and again, as a Second Amendment rights supporter, I don't think it's all that controversial to make this trigger illegal. We've had fully automatic weapons have been severely prescribed for civilian use and ownership for a long time. It's not a particularly controversial idea. I would think that a trigger that allows a semi-automatic weapon to function as an automatic weapon, I think would be, to me, that's low-hanging fruit. But have you had any conversations with these lawmakers and talked about, you know, the next step in terms of making that something that we can't purchase in this state?
I've talked to a couple about that and brought it up to me. I mean, you know how this goes, right? The two of you can get your savvy political observers. You know how this goes. I say those things. I point that out publicly because I was squarely a part of this heinous murder and attempted murders. It's clearly a part of it. Played a role, and you get the calls, and people are like, "Oh, come on, Drew, the guns don't kill people," and I believe that. I completely agree. It's not the guns that do it, but it also is true that we, just to your point, we also recognize that we don't see automatic weapons fire as being part of what's protected the Second Amendment. That's not even controversial anymore. It's been that way for decades, and so this functional equivalent is in the same category. And you're free to outlaw it if you choose to. You can outlaw it tomorrow. People will still be able to get them. That's true. But wouldn't it be nice if it wasn't enshrined in North Dakota law that you can't prescribe this? Not only that just let them be lawful by not outlawing them. Within our law is that nothing in the prescriptions. I think they're outlawing bump stocks, which is a similar type thing that creates the same thing, a functional equivalent of an automatic weapon. They said nothing should be interpreted to outlaw these binary triggers. Now, to be fair, several lawmakers have told me it wasn't clear to anybody what the implications were of this, and they expect there to be a change. It's like a lot of things. I'm not even criticizing them at this point. I would hope that they would come into the next session, and it won't mean these things go away and can never be used on planet Earth again, and nobody could order them online if they're legal elsewhere. But do you want to enshrine in North Dakota law that they can't be outlawed? I don't. I'll tell you this: our BCI here in North Dakota, they don't use binary triggers. They don't have automatic weapons.
Drew,
that should say something to people.
Yeah. Thinking more about public policy and I think you're right. There's no way we can ever make sure these things never happen. But it's my understanding this person had all these weapons legally, and that there were some calls where the local police went and checked on him because there were some concerns expressed. Would a red flag law have helped in this situation to make sure that this gentleman who clearly there was people who are seeing some signs of some things that gave them pause? Would a red flag law have helped here to get this arsenal out of his hands before he did something like this?
You know what? I don't know that they would, because I don't have enough familiarity with red flag laws, and I think that it's still important to note that it's a federal provision, a Guardian report, which is something I had never heard of in my 10 years as U.S. Attorney. I think it's pretty new. I had never heard of a Guardian report. The FBI gets them, and then it's kind of like a red flag in a way. They get a report of somebody of concern. It might be about a lot of things. It doesn't have to be firearms, but in this instance, it was in part about firearms. And then the FBI dispatches law enforcement in that community, wherever that person is, to go and have a contact. And they did. And they make an assessment when they get out there. And that was done in this instance. And there was nothing, they didn't have anything to point to that was alarming. They were all lawful weapons. He expressed lawful purpose for them. And they had to make an assessment and made that assessment. And it would be, 20/20 hindsight. You'd say, well, they should have taken the weapons. Well, heck, right. Yeah, they would have been subject to a civil lawsuit themselves, and they would have lost. They didn't have any basis upon which to remove the weapons because he hadn't done anything with them or made a particularized threat or renewed that threat in the face of law enforcement. So, I'm not up to speed on the latest with, and red flag laws are not all the same. So there's different variations on that.
Yeah.
I think it is a reminder though, that there's just evil in the world. There's some evil in the world that is going to try to manifest itself in some way, shape or form. And it is incumbent upon all of us. It's important for people, family members, associates, other people. If you see something or learn of something that is particularly troubling with regard to an individual, it is worth your while to, see what you can do to have somebody make an assessment, law enforcement or someone else.
It's always hard when we talk about this stuff and then we look back. It was a shooter like this who has had, maybe some interactions with law enforcement in the past, and it's easy to say, well, we should have known and we could have done something then and prevented this. One of the things that are missing is how many times law enforcement will go out to investigate somebody who has similar reports and nothing ever happens, and that person's a law-abiding citizen, and they never do anything either. I mean, we don't hear about those things because nothing happened,
right.
And that's really complicated because I'm not against the idea of obviously the law enforcement going out and checking out potential threats. I'm not against even maybe having some sort of a process through which somebody's having some struggles. We take their guns for a little. I mean, I'm not against any of that, but none of this stuff is as simple sometimes as the people who like to talk about it make it seem.
Agreed.
It's just hard all the way around. Talking about those previous I mean, is there a point at which we're going to see the Guardian report?
I don't know that. I can tell you this: I haven't seen the Guardian report. It's a report that the FBI has. I haven't seen that. To be fair, I didn't ask anybody before. They characterized sort of what it was. We had meetings and I talked about it, but that's up to the federal authorities have different, our open records laws don't apply to them. The public will eventually see all of our BCI reports though. And I don't know whether the Guardian report is characterized in there. I'm not sure that it would be because it's part of that.
I want to commend that. I mean, obviously the state of North Dakota doesn't have any control over what the federal government does with their information, but I really appreciate, and this is no jab at your predecessor, Wayne Stengen, who I think was also generally pretty good on transparency issues, but I really like this approach where we're just so forthright about things and things are right out in the open. I think one of the problems in the past where we saw, all these concerns about police use of force is there was always sort of a reticence of law enforcement to make things like video and things available. And if we did get them, it would happen like a year after the fact or a long time between. I am very much, and maybe this is my bias speaking as a member of the news media, but I think it is much better if the public can see these things right away, be able to read the reports just as soon as possible after, obviously we don't want to jeopardize an investigation, but just as soon as the public can see them, the public should see them. The public should see this stuff because the problem is when we leave vacuums of information, we live in an age where everybody's got a Twitter account, everybody's got a Facebook account, and they fill those vacuums with nonsense sometimes. And it's better if you put the real information out. You still can't combat all the nonsense, but boy, it makes it a lot easier when we have the official record in the record right away.
100%. You and I have talked about this issue for years. I'm a big believer in it. I've long been an advocate of body cams and then also recording of in custody interrogations and what have you, because the public, it doesn't come down to everyone has a right to this is fun to get this information. It's how you drive better government. better everything by people seeing and then commenting positively or negatively. I mean, what if this had been an example of just absolutely, underwhelming police response and clear challenges of training and
as we saw in another jurisdiction in Uvalde, Texas, where serious problems were revealed.
Yeah, and when that happens, how is the public going to agitate for change if all they're being asked to do is, do you support people in uniform or not? Well, yes, I support people doing a professional, ethical job in uniform. Yes, and because I recognize that we are all human beings, I feel like we're better off when we have that level of transparency. We've been really forthright about these circumstances in this case because the investigation was different. The subject is dead already, so there's not going to be a trial. And we've been comfortable. I have every news conference that we've held, with law enforcement, making sure that they're comfortable us talking about this and that it's not going to, cut off any further lines of investigation or whatever. In fact, at one of the press conferences, we put out a phone number. Us talking about it generated a bunch of, leads for people to come in and evaluate additional information about Barakat, who's kind of a mystery. Well, that's an important matter. Talking about these things publicly, I've stressed this across my career. Sometimes you're standing there talking about something and they think your office is holding the championship belt. And some days you're, standing there holding a very difficult situation and a flaming bag of manure, frankly. And you were paid by the public. You're paid by the public to take out public responsibilities, and it's our job to talk about it publicly. Even when you get criticism from some members of the media, they'll go, that guy likes to be on TV. Well, no. What I like to do is be accountable and talk about what we're doing, and then let us know what you think.
Drew, can you talk a little, you mentioned like the working with local law enforcement, but this is, a lot of jurisdictions here between the feds and, obviously our mutual friend, Max Schneider, being at the previous press conference with you. How has that been going in terms of the feds working with the state and the locals? It feels like this is a place where government is working relatively really well. Can you talk a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah, it's been great. I've known Mac for many, many years. Actually, I first met him, he was an intern when I was U.S. attorney way back when, the first time. He interned for us one summer, and I was trying Rodriguez's case that summer. I didn't get to know him particularly well. Then we got to know each other a bit in our years in public service when he was in the state senate and I was the lieutenant governor. I put that out there just to say that personal relationships do matter, and at the small state, and it matters. There's good relationships between these offices anyway, but I think for what it's worth, I think it's been helpful that Mac and I have a good personal relationship. We communicate very easily with each other and with trust. And so it's been really good. I appreciate Mac and I were on the phone the very first night. The FBI wanted to be helpful. People misunderstand sometimes that the FBI does not have like a general jurisdiction. They don't investigate local homicide cases, but we had reason to believe that there were things that should be evaluated in this instance, and it was kind of an all hands on deck, and they were very helpful, and the FBI was going to be involved, and that means the chief federal law enforcement officer should be involved. That was a post I was privileged to hold twice, and Mac is in that role now, the presidentially appointed U.S. attorney, and has just embraced his work, and I like him personally very much. I like him professionally very much, and it's been seamless, really good communication on it, and that I think filters to the other people that you work with. I mean, that's encouraging ATF and FBI and other federal entities to then, be that kind of open and have that kind of communication with our BCI and with sheriff's departments and the police departments. And it's pretty good in North Dakota anyway, but pretty good can always be even better. And I think it helps when the leadership of those respective entities has that commitment. And, Mac is a great spokesman. He doesn't even need to speak for him, but I think he'd feel comfortable me saying that, we are committed to that, and we, on behalf of our entities, he's chief federal law enforcement, I'm chief state law enforcement, and we want to set an example for people and make sure that we make what's already good in North Dakota even better.
Drew, two-parter last question as we're bumping up against the time that you made available for us, which I'm certainly very thankful for. One is, are we ever going to, I know you alluded to, we're going to get some more information about computer searches and whatnot in the future. Are we going to reach a point where we know what this and I'm purposely not using his name. I that's a editorial decision on my part, but are we going to reach a point where we understand why this person, I mean, we know that he planned it. We know that he wanted, I guess based just on what you've said, we know he wanted mass casualties, but do we know why? Are we ever going to find out why? And the second part of the question is, I know, for instance, some of the Muslim populated Muslim community in the Fargo Moorhead area, they struggled with this, and they made a decision not. Yeah, I know one report was they made a decision not to assess in the burial of this person. Have you talked with them at all and checked in on how they're doing?
I have not. Well, I haven't had a chance to check in with them directly. I've had some communication back through some other channels. There was some appreciation of some comments that I made early on, and I was sincere in those comments because, there's nothing exotic about the Muslim faith, and for people to think like, oh, that's some exotic fact in this whole thing that he happens to be Muslim or claim Muslim faith, I thought was unfair to like see some immediate angle there. And I made the comment at one point, I don't, as far as this case goes, from what we had seen to that point, and that remains true today, by the way, nothing we had learned through our investigation made his Muslim faith of any more note than my Lutheran faith with regard to this investigation. Now, I've gotten some negative Twitter traffic about that. I only laugh because I swear to God, Twitter is made for people just to come up with the most ridiculous angle on things. So I have not spoken with the Muslim leaders in the community over in Fargo. I think by and large that's because, they were, again, not to speak for other people, they seemed really comfortable with how we had addressed the issue to the extent that it was an issue at all. And it's not. So far, we see nothing in our investigation have anything to do that would give us any motivation to feel that he had any motivation derived from his Muslim faith. That either in choosing his targets or in what was motivating him to do this. And to your initial question, I'm going to lower people's expectations on this because here we are, this many weeks into the investigation, and we are left with what is way too often the case across 3 decades in and out of law enforcement. I can tell you there's so many times that all you can do is shake your head. You can't figure out the why. What would motivate? Usually a violent act of some kind. What would motivate that? There's a lot of crime that gets committed. People are greedy or they're lazy and they don't want to go about doing the things the rest of us do to make life work. And a lot of things motivate people. And sometimes just horrible things are carried out by just dark souls who are not thinking of the implication or are thinking and don't care about the implications of their act. And that's where we're at in this case at this point. I don't have anything else to offer you on what were his motivations because we can't find any in the material, his online inquiries or on his phone, which can usually be a pretty good insight to a person's life. He was pretty quiet on there. He had very few associates, people with whom he normally would interact. We have not yet discerned, and I don't want people to be expecting that we will get to an aha moment where we can see what on earth made him get up that morning and go to do this, except to say this, that he was well armed. This was well planned. He was prepared to carry out a mass casualty event, and he was very well equipped to do that if he only had a couple of the guns that he had. But he had multiple firearms, 1,800 rounds, 2 canisters with explosive materials in them that were turned to shrapnel when they were detonated by law enforcement later, and gas cans filled with gasoline in there in the vehicle as well. It's just a dark, sad circumstance. And going forward too, there is an implication that I talked about a little bit there. I was talking about it all last winter in the session, and I'm going to continue to talk about it in all the days I'm privileged to serve as Attorney General, which is we have a very significant increase in violent crime in this state, and that includes, in particular, firearms violence by people, drug dealers, and people committing violent crimes with firearms. And there is an absolute epidemic of mistreatment of law enforcement, where they are assaulted, resisting arrest, and fleeing through our community. And I did talk about that till I was blue in the face last session, and I failed. We did not get that legislation through, seeking some mandatory sentences. And I'm not going to go into it too far today, because I'll wait for this to come to a point where we want to talk about some legislative demands. They won't cure everything, but we have to turn back this culture, which has worsened dramatically over the last 10 years in our state, even around the country, but in our state, that's what we're worried about here. It has coarsened. The treatment of law enforcement is eroding routinely. You hear it everywhere you go, and well before this event, and the fleeing. And I got to listen to a House member get up on the floor of the House and say, I don't know what the Attorney General is talking about. We already get long sentences in these matters, many months and sometimes years.
Well, that's
Where are you seeing? You're seeing concurrent sentences, and those cops are standing in there, and some guy jacked her in the jaw when she's trying to make a lawful arrest, and he's getting sentenced on the underlying offense. And okay, fine, you get another 4 months for this. We're going to have you serve it concurrent. That's a freebie. That's no extra time. And you know what? To top it off, you might even get paroled early. It happens most of the time.
Well,
it's not right. We have to have truth in sentencing. We have to have predictability in sentencing.
Well, that was a lengthy debate back during the last session. I am certain it's going to be a debate in the next session, and I am certain we will have you on about that to talk about that more at length.
I look forward to that.
Certainly appreciate all your time today, Drew, for coming on.
Thank you, Drew. Thanks for your work.
Hi there, my name is James Wallner. I produce and host the podcast Dakota Spotlight, a true crime podcast that tackles historical and unsolved crimes in the upper Midwest. Follow along with me as we search for a missing girl, attempt to solve a 45-year-old murder, and much, much more. That's Dakota Spotlight Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts, or at inforum.com/podcasts.
Well, just finished our interview with Drew Wrigley, and I know I reiterated it a couple of times during the interview. I really think that the approach that he's taking to this is a good one. I think he's very forthright. I think he's very candid. When he doesn't know something, he just says, "I don't know. I'm trying to find out." The Guardian report, like, I've never heard of it before. I think it gives people a degree of confidence now, and this is not me smacking at Drew, but the test of this is a time. I mean, in this instance, the Fargo police, they did a great job. They're heroes. There may be another instance in the future where law enforcement officers have egg on their faces about something, and I hope we're as committed to transparency, and I believe we will be until I'm proven wrong, that we're as committed to transparency in those situations as well.
Yeah, I hope there's also some policy discussions that take place. I asked about the red flag, and I understand all the issues that, it's not a perfect solution, but I think it's just one more tool that could be used. Yeah. I also think this binary trigger thing, it's really too bad that we're having this conversation now rather than when this bill was being passed in the session, because I have it was passed bipartisan, right? Overwhelmingly.
Yeah. I think everybody, because I remember that debate, and I went back and watched some of the video and read some of the testimony, and I think a lot of people just thought, oh, it's this gimmicky thing, it's for gun enthusiasts, it's not really a dangerous thing. And it turned out everybody was wrong, and that happens sometimes. And I don't think anybody deserves blame.
Nope, I agree. But I think sometimes when we talk about things related to guns and the Second Amendment, and like you said, you're a supporter of the Second Amendment, and then all of this stuff sort of gets pulled into that discussion. And I think that, legislators don't want to seem as they're anti-gun. So I think sometimes we don't have as deep a conversations about things like this as we should, because it's just, we don't want to be anti-Second Amendment. We don't want to get that F from the NRA. Yeah,
and we get, people have knee-jerk reactions, and then we start promoting, well, if only we had done this, and then all our problems would be solved. And it all gets shoehorned into these very simplistic, tribal shouting matches that don't do any good.
Mental health alone is not going to do this. Banning guns alone is not going to do this. There's just a lot of different things.
That was the column I wrote about the binary trigger. Is he didn't do this because he had access. He's like, oh, I have a binary trigger, I'll go shoot a bunch of people. That's not what happened. But the binary trigger certainly helped him be more effective. Yeah. And I don't know that we all, as Drew put it, we don't consider automatic weapons to be a necessary part of exercising our our Second Amendment rights. That's been established. It's not particularly controversial. And so I would think that a trigger that allows you to basically, as a practical matter, produce automatic weapon fire from a semi-automatic weapon ought to be illegal. And we made a mistake. I think it was a mistake. I don't think it's I don't think anybody deserves to be thrown under the bus for this, but let's correct it. That's low-hanging fruit in all this. Let's correct it. Although what remains is the larger thing is this person did this, and it sounded from Drew like we're never going to find out why. And that's tough too. So, all right, let's shift gears. That's such an unhappy thing to talk about. I mean,
and it's such a, I think, Rob, that was the deepest, like sort of, I don't want to say dark, but sort of, we come on here and talk about politics, and politics are very serious, never as serious as the conversation we just had with Drew Wrigley.
Yeah. I mean, it's
real life stuff.
It is. It's tough stuff. And by the way, if you haven't watched that video, I know we have it up on our Inforum news sites. I'm sure there's plenty of other places you could track it down. You could probably even request it from the state if you wanted to. I would say watch it. I had to make myself do it. I think it's important. I think it's important to see what they're actually talking about. I always try to watch the videos, and whenever there's a controversial, law enforcement thing, I always try to watch the videos, because I think it's as terrible as they are sometimes. If you really want to understand these things, you have to watch them. All right, let's switch gears. Let's talk about the North Dakota Republican Party. We can be a little more lighthearted about that. So a few months ago, we had a takeover of the state party where we had sort of a Sandy Sanford, who is a culture warrior activist. Although she's done both. I've seen where she said in one interview that she wears the culture warrior thing as a badge of honor. In another, she kind of tried to distance herself from it. I don't know. I think anybody who's out there investing a lot of their time in pronouns and book bans and everything else, I think you're a culture warrior. But she is now the chair of the party, narrow vote. She won by 1 vote. And since that has happened, the North Dakota Republican Party has seen 3 consecutive months of negative cash flow. Now, I want to stipulate that's not necessarily unusual. Depending on, the political cycle, we're obviously in an off year. This is not an election year. Sometimes that happens. It's not unusual, but 3 straight months and the cash on hand is down. I mean, you look at the first months of the year versus the last 3 months, you could see a point at which a change happened in the leadership of the party, and you can identify it in the data. But Chad, I really wanted to get your point of view, because I've only ever looked at this stuff from the outside in. You've actually been an executive director of a political party. How worried should Republicans be about this?
So I think it's hard to say, because I think your point about, it's just 3 months and not having like the historical data of, 2 years ago for those same 3 months.
And even if you go back, because I could put that data together, but even then, it's going to depend what was happening. Did we have contested races? Did we not have?
Well, in simple things like, did you have your annual event, fundraising event during that month?
If we go back and look, we're also comparing it to pandemic years. So, which did all sorts of weird things.
So I think I thought, like the Gretchen Stenjum, asking for refunds, that kind of thing is really telling. I think the other thing, sort of thinking back about my time in working in Democratic politics, the congressional delegations, Heidi Heitkamp, were always big sort of drivers of fundraising for the state party on the Democrat side. Do Hoeven, Kramer, Armstrong, Burgum stop helping raise money or stop contributing money to the state party? I think that will be what we see in sort of the long run. If they're not going to events, if they're not going to PACs in Washington, D.C. and asking for money to come back for that kind of stuff, or if Burgum is just raising the money into his gubernatorial campaign if he decides to run in 2024. I think that's when we'll see sort of the ramifications of sort of this takeover of the GOP. I think to a certain extent, it's a little early to tell, but you don't want your cash on hand to be going down at this point.
Yeah.
This is when you're trying to be lifting up your cash on hand to spend it during the election cycle. That's when it should be going down.
Building up the war chest.
Right.
Yeah. The fact it's not a good trend, and it certainly doesn't match the first part of this year. But I think what you're saying, it's too small a sample size, as we baseball fans like to say, right?
Yep.
A week of batting average doesn't tell you much about a player. You need more. But I think it's a story that's worth watching, because again, we did have some high profile anecdotes of people asking for their money back from the party. I think we're kind of through that. And now it's a harder thing to quantify, which is, how many donations that would have happened aren't happening now. And I think that's what's going to show up in the data, but we're going to see. That's a story I'm tracking.
And Rob, the further we get away from the election, the less sensitive people might be to this. Maybe there's the decision by the people who were ousted by one vote to say, hey, we're all in this together, and maybe try to bring this thing together, or they're not that dissatisfied with what Sandy's been doing in office. I mean, the feelings are raw right now.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. Because you can't, the context that it's happening. Every election cycle since I started writing about politics, there's intra-party fighting and there's hard feelings, and usually everybody came together. It's hard to say that. There is a political realignment that's happening both in North Dakota and nationally.
Right.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see what sort of an impact that has. The other thing I guess we could talk about is next week is the big debate, the first, and I almost said NDGOP, the first GOP debate. Doug Burgum's going to be on the stage. I saw his super PAC sent out a thing. I think they're calling him Rattlesnake Doug now. In fact, I'm gonna look it up. I want to make sure that I'm
yeah, you don't want to give the wrong nickname.
Yeah,
if a guy wants to be called Rattlesnake, you don't want to call him, some other snake.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Or scorpion.
Exactly. No, it's definitely snake, because they were playing on the rattlesnake thing down. I guess he ate some rattlesnake or something down at the Iowa State Fair. I didn't see it. It must not have been when I was.
Here's the deal, Rob. If you and I haven't heard about him eating rattlesnake in Iowa, I'm not sure it's nickname worthy at this point.
Well, maybe not. He did it on it's Burgum is rattlesnake ready for the debate. That's what it is.
Rattlesnake ready.
Rattlesnake ready, because he was with a podcast called the Ruthless Podcast, which I got to admit I haven't heard of. And while they were down there, they had rattlesnake tacos. So he's rattlesnake ready. For the debate, which
let me go on record as saying I think you put any meat in a taco and it's going to be delicious. So I'm sure those tacos are delicious.
Tacos are just one of those things. You get dessert tacos, all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So what do you think? The debate's happening now. All sorts of weirdness. So I guess the big news as we're recording this is Donald Trump, and this is the thing that it just the whole. The GOP makes a big deal. If you want to participate in the debate, you got to sign this loyalty pledge to support the party's ultimate candidate. Well, the front runner's not signing, right? Everybody else is, because the whole pledge is about making sure the people who are participating in the debate would support Donald Trump, right? In any other election cycle where it's not Donald Trump, you don't really have to get the Republicans to commit to that. They're ultimately going to support, even if it was a tough primary. In years past, it was a given that all the Republicans were going to support the Republican nominee who emerged from the process. They had to do it this time because the nominee is probably going to be Donald Trump, and there are definitely Republicans who don't want to support him, so they have to do this loyalty pledge. But the only person who's not signing the loyalty pledge is Donald Trump. And then like the GOP's doing all this stuff, especially for Donald Trump, right? And they schedule this debate. Well, who's skipping the debate? Donald Trump skipping the debate. And who's also now doing counter programming to the debate? Donald Trump, who's going to do an interview with Tucker Carlson on Wednesday rather than the GOP debate. So, not only as the party sort of obsequiously, tries to stay in Trump's favor and everything, Trump is just dunking on him right in the face. And so every time I hear whether it's Vivek Ramaswamy or Ron DeSantis or whatever, and they're kind of running blocker, and they're running down the indictments and everything like that, and they're kind of defending Donald Trump. And meanwhile, Donald Trump doesn't give a rip about any of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's the right move by Donald Trump, right? What does he have? He's up 30 some odd points. What does he have to gain by going to this debate? It's all downside.
Yeah, he's up 40 points on Ron DeSantis. 40.
Yeah, and so he goes there and just has Chris Christie beat the crap out of him for an hour.
Yeah.
Whatever. But I would say, in terms of Governor Burgum, I saw a Politico interview. He's still refusing to talk about Donald Trump. And I still don't understand the strategy behind, there's enough people talking about him. We're going to focus on policy, all that kind of stuff. I don't know how you get there. I don't know how you get from 3% in Iowa or 1% in Iowa to where Donald Trump is, unless you at least mention the guy.
How do you beat? I mean, because that's the thing I keep reminding people. He's running against Donald Trump. He decided to run against Donald Trump. He made that decision. So I don't know how many times, how do you beat somebody that you also won't criticize? Right? And I'm not even talking about mudslinging or any of that, we're going to run a positive campaign. You have to contrast yourself with the other person, right? It doesn't even have to be mudslinging. You can just say, I think his policy on Ukraine was a mistake, and here's why. I mean, just talk about some of those things.
I don't like the fact that he's been indicted all these times. And there's, all this stuff going on. January 6th made me feel uncomfortable and how he was involved in that. I mean, there's things or just a simple message of it's time for the Republican Party to move on from Donald Trump.
Right. Or
the only way we lose to Joe Biden is if we nominate Donald Trump.
A vote for Donald Trump in the primary is a vote to elect Joe Biden as the next president of the United States, because I don't think Trump can beat him.
And as somebody who wants to see Joe Biden get reelected, if he truly ends up being on the ballot the whole time, I'm all for Donald Trump getting nominated. Bad for the country.
I would hope. We had a conversation about that during the last midterm. Remember, where you had Democrats who are giving money and support, or not giving money to, but spending money in support of Trumpy congressional candidates, and they were successful. They got a moderate Republican out. There's another example. Bad for the country, I guess. Good for Democrats.
Well, in one of those candidates up in Michigan, the Pete Mayer, the guy who voted for impeachment, and then the Dems helped him lose in his primary. I've heard stories of him basically saying, "I'm never going to trust anybody on the left or ever again, or vote if I ever get back into politics. I'm never going to support you again." So I'm not voting for Donald Trump in the primary. I'm just sort of hoping.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping. I had hoped that we would hopefully have two different choices than even Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I think both parties could do a heck of a lot better. I think Joe Biden's too old. He needs to move on. I think Donald Trump is not only too old, I think he's a criminal. And so I don't know. It's a terrible, terrible mess. But it just, to watch the Republican Party, do everything Donald Trump wants them to do, and he still doesn't do anything for them. It's still all about Donald Trump, on and on and on. And it's remarkable to me. It's the most craven thing, watching Ted Cruz go nuts on Fox News about the indictments, how terrible they are. Donald Trump called his wife ugly. Donald Trump suggested that Ted Cruz's father was part of the JFK assassination. And here's Ted Cruz, Donald Trump's personal doormat, still doing everything he wants him to do.
And how about Lindsey Graham? I mean, Lindsey Graham has gone from Trump being the worst thing in the world to on the floor on January 6th saying, enough is enough, to, again, saying that this is all looking at all these different district attorneys and saying they're the ones that are corrupt. This Georgia thing is a big deal. Reading through that, it is a big deal for the future of our country. And to have people like Lindsey Graham saying it's all okay, or it's, our guy Donald couldn't possibly have done anything wrong, is maddening.
Did you know that the average American president has had 2 felony indictments each? Donald Trump has 91, and the rest of them have 0. So that's where we're at as a country right now.
Say that again. So he's got 91.
91
so that makes
criminal
the average president has had
2 felony indictments.
But those are all Donald Trump's
But they're
indictments.
all Donald Trump. Richard Nixon was never he was impeached, he was never convicted, and he was never actually charged with it. I mean, he was pardoned after the fact, so never indicted.
But do you remember that one time Obama wore a tan suit? Remember that?
Remember the time he said 57 states, and that was a really big deal. That's the other thing that just floors me is it's like in an alternate universe, Republicans are obsessed with Hunter Biden, right? And the thing is, the Hunter Biden story is a real story. It's not always as sensational maybe as Republicans make it sound sometimes, but that's a real problem for Joe Biden, and it deserves real answers and real investigation and real scrutiny. But I don't understand how you're Republicans, and I listen to them, I'll say, Hunter Biden this, Hunter Biden that, and you get to the end of it, and I want to say, okay, great, now do Donald Trump. Because
let me go on record as saying, as somebody who does support the current president, I am all for the special counsel, special prosecutor to look into Hunter Biden. If Hunter Biden broke the law, he should be held to account for the work, for what he did. I don't care if he's a Democrat, Republican, Trump, Biden, whatever. Nobody's above the law. Right. And I think we should all agree on that.
That's a really interesting point, because I hear that too all the time. People are like, well, they're just doing this because it's Donald Trump. They're just singling it out. Well, they're doing this to Donald Trump because they do it to us. Americans across the country have search warrants served on them every day. Americans across the country are arraigned in court and have to hire defense attorneys and have to plead guilty or not guilty. They have to go through all this process when they're accused of crimes. It's happening to Donald Trump because it happens to everyone else.
And everybody else doesn't get to go to their donors to pay for their legal fees. That's the other. What is the number that he spent on legal fees? Like $40 million from his campaign or something like that? I mean, he's duping people into paying for his crimes. Like literally paying for his crimes.
And the thing is I'm not even sure they're doing. I think there's plenty of Trump supporters who are more than happy to pay for it because they think the fix is in. I'm not even comfortable using duping. His cult of personality, I think, is just fine paying for it. Because the thing is, as pathetic as it is, he already had a big lead in the primary. He shot up in the polls when he started getting indictments. He said the other night, I forget where he was, but he said from behind the podium, he says, we need a few more indictments and we can, and then this presidential race is over.
And he's right.
He's right. He's right. Every time he gets indicted now I don't know if he's right with the general electorate, but
he's right for the primary. I think he's wrong for the general election.
I think that's accurate. But I mean, just the fact that he thinks every time I get indicted, and supporters think that way too. He's being persecuted. So it's remarkable. And into all of that, Doug Burgum has to go on stage and make his point. And it makes me sad. Because Doug Burgum should be talking about Donald Trump. I know Doug would rather be talking about all his ideas. And listen, he's got a lot of great ideas. He's got a lot of really interesting things to say. But I don't know how you can ignore the fact that the front runner in this race is under 91 criminal indictments.
No one wants to be talking about Donald Trump. No one wants to be talking about Donald Trump. But the fact of the matter is so many of these folks, have begged for his endorsement, or endorsed him or whatever, and they're scared of their own shadows when it comes to standing up for, again, thank goodness Chris Christie's in this race, so somebody is going after him, and Will Never Heard Of is in this race.
And Asa Hutchinson, I think, has actually been pretty good. Just Chris Christie people, he's doing pretty good about getting attention. And he's great to listen to, and he's right.
Yeah. What's interesting is Burgum's, is the idea, the strategy behind this is it that Trump ends up dropping out or gets, the oxygen comes out and then those Trump people come to Burgum in the primary? I don't understand the calculus.
I don't know. Maybe that is the calculus. Maybe it is, well, eventually he's going to get taken down. The votes are going to start happening in Iowa and the polling's going to be out because that's happened before. The polling's out the window and he crashes and burns or he gets taken out legally or whatever. And then, it's anybody's race. And I think they're thinking,
why go to Burgum?
Because he never, I think Burgum says, well, if Trump's out of the picture, then all the other idea stuff will matter. And also he won't have a track record of having bashed Trump to alienate the Trump voters who are looking for somewhere to go.
Well, but he and every other candidate, right? Other than Christie and like, I mean, I think that's the problem. I just can't see these Trump voters who have stuck with Trump through all this to this point, who are like, you know what? Now I want the ideas guy. Now I want the guy who's going to give us have a deep conversation about China and how energy affects all of our foreign policy. I feel like that's a big leap for people to take.
I don't disagree, but I don't know. I don't know how you get in the race and not talk about the front runner and not talk about why we shouldn't vote for him, why making him the Republican nominee would be a mistake. He gets talk, and I know I've looked him in the eyeball as he is frustrated about me asking about those things. And I just got to tell you, if you didn't want to be asked about this, then why did you start a campaign against the guy?
You know, Rob, hopefully a week from now, after they have this debate, you and I are having this conversation and Governor Burgum has a good night and he gets to stay on the national stage. I honestly, I hope that's the case. I hope he has a good night. I hope something happens.
Burgum, I think setting all ideology and everything aside, he is the sort of candidate we should want to run for president, right? He's got the credentials. He's it. He's the sort of candidate we should want. We can get into debates about his policy ideas or whatever. He's exemplary, I think, of the best that America has to offer. Right? And a lot of other people are too, but he's one. He fits that mold. Donald Trump does not, but what we want right now is entertainment and not leadership.
And I also think that, he feels a little scripted right now to me. The sort of avoiding questions on Trump and other things. What's the deal? Let Bartlett be Bartlett. I hope at some point they just let Burgum be Burgum, because the way he's governed is very much a thoughtful approach, vetoing things that were maybe bad politics, signing other things that might be bad politics.
If you remember, I was very tough on Burgum in 2016. And one of the reasons was because I liked him personally. I had met with him before he even announced his campaign. I got to know him pretty well. And I've always liked Doug personally. The Doug that shows up on the campaign trail is another matter entirely. And that has always turned me off when he gets into sort of scripted mode, or he starts, these sort of cheesy talking points sometimes. The actual Doug Burgum is a super interesting, super compelling person. And the more he lets that person out, I think the more people like him.
And somewhat funny. I was at the Governor's Innovation on Education Summit on Tuesday, and he gave his keynote, and he had some jokes that really, really landed. Yeah. That sort of had the crowd eating out of his hand, but you don't see that side of him that much.
He's really smart, and he's really funny, and he's really engaging, and I wish he'd let that side out more often. All right, we are at 1 hour, so we should wrap this up. Chad, thanks for your time. Next week, Wednesday, of course, will be the debate. I'm sure we'll do some fun stuff about that on the show. Maybe Chad will join us on a Wednesday show to sort of preview the debate a little bit.
Whatever you need, and if it works for my schedule.
If it works for Chad's schedule.
Because people need my opinion, Rob.
Everyone's entitled to Chad's opinion on things. So
they're clamoring.
They're clamoring for it. All right, we're going to stop it there. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.
Later.
Did you know Forum Communications Company has a robust podcast library? At inforum.com/podcasts, we have everything from politics, sports, true crime, outdoor adventure, and more. Visit inforum.com/podcasts and explore them all today.